Israel Hands is a pirate who is best known for being Blackbeard's second in command at the height of his notoriety. By 1718, Blackbeard had almost 300 men under his command and enough ships to make up a mini-fleet. Blackbeard trusted Hands with the command of one of those boats, a former merchant vessel called the Adventure. Another notable ship in Blackbeard's flotilla was the Revenge, a vessel previously captained by Stede, a man from the landed gentry of Barbados who had given up his position of wealth and privilege for a life of piracy, eventually joining Blackbeard and taking up residence on Blackbeard's flagship, the Queen Anne's Revenge. In 1718, Blackbeard had just successfully laid siege to Charleston, one of the most well-populated and important towns in 18th century America, which cemented his place as a pirate legend. However, all of this pirate activity was having a big impact on the profitability of trade between the New World and Europe, so naturally King George of England could not allow this, and naval authorities began hunting the pirates in earnest and hanging them for their crimes. Blackbeard's recent targeting of one of Britain's flagship settlements put a massive target on his back. There was, however, a get-out-of-jail-free card that Blackbeard could take advantage of. On the 5th of September in 1717, the king had announced the Act of Grace, which promised pirates a pardon for their crimes as long as they surrendered themselves to an appropriate authority figure and promised not to commit any further crimes. So that's Blackbeard's way out. He can escape punishment if he pleads the Act of Grace to an acceptable official. An official like, for example, Charles Eden, who was the governor of North Carolina and therefore had the power to bestow a pardon. All Blackbeard has to do is get to Eden before the deadline and surrender. There's only one problem with this plan, though. Blackbeard has a crew of 300 people, remember, and 1/300th of a share of booty will not go very far towards a retirement fund, so Blackbeard, Israel Hands, and 40 of their closest team devise a plan. They sail to Topsail Inlet and accidentally beach the Queen Anne's Revenge and the Adventure in the shallow waters off the coast of North Carolina, grounding their two boats with enough force to make them absolutely unsailable. Blackbeard pretends to be nervous about missing the upcoming deadline for the pardon and asks Stede to sail to the mainland and beg the pardon while Blackbeard stays behind and deals with the beached boats. While Bonnet is away, Blackbeard and Israel Hands and the few crew who were in on the plan were transferring all of their stolen treasure to the one remaining seaworthy ship left of Blackbeard's fleet. The group then sail away while the rest of the men are sleeping, stranding about 260 men on the sea banks with no food, no water and no money. Luckily for the marooned pirates, Stede comes back 2 days later with the king's pardon in hand, only to find no Blackbeard, just hundreds of pissed-off pirates. Bonnet allows the abandoned crew onto his ship and they set sail to find Blackbeard. Later, once they've settled in Bath Town, Blackbeard is playing a game of cards with Hands and some other men. Blackbeard fires his pistol under the table at Hands, hitting him in the knee. According to Captain Johnson, the author of A General History of the Robberies and Murders of the Most Notorious Pirates, when Hands asked why Teach shot him, all he was told was, "If I don't know and then kill one of you, you'll forget who I am." Why, yes, thank you. My Bristolian accent is impeccable. Unfortunately, I will not be taking notes at this time, though. So Israel Hands is left unable to walk thanks to Blackbeard's little stunt. And this means that when the authorities finally catch up with the infamous pirate captain, which resulted in Blackbeard's final battle, Israel Hands was stranded on dry land in town rather than being able to fight at his captain's side. Hands was arrested with the rest of Blackbeard's surviving crew. Israel Hands avoided being hanged by turning informant and giving evidence against his former crewmates and by taking advantage of another king's pardon that was issued on the 23rd of July in 1718. It's generally thought that Hands became an important source for Captain Johnson's book after outliving both Blackbeard and Stede Bonnet. Johnson claimed that Hands died years later as a beggar in London. Alright guys? So I want to talk about how Israel Hands from Our Flag Means Death deserved better than what he got, and since I can't convince my IRL friends to listen to me about a TV show for this length of time, which is understandable, I've decided to make it the internet's problem. At least you can click away though, so if you want to do that, absolutely feel free, but I hope you enjoy. There will be major spoilers for both Series 1 and Series 2 in this video, so if that's not something you want to hear, then I absolutely encourage you to click away now and just come back later once you've seen the show. So first of all, for people who might not have seen Our Flag Means Death, I will just give a quick rundown of the things that you need to know from Series 1 and 2. In the interest of keeping the runtime from being too long, I'm just going to mention the parts that are relevant for the things that I'll be ranting about later. If you have seen both of this series and you just want to skip to the juicy media analysis later on, please just skip to the timestamp that's going to be on the screen right now. So the series is actually based on true events. As mentioned before, Stede Bonnet was a real wealthy landowner who actually did have a ship built for himself, and he really did run away to become a pirate. And he truly did come across Blackbeard, and they actually did work together for a while. However, the show is only based on this very loosely. The characters are very much fictionalised versions of the historical figures. So Series 1 of Our Flag Means Death follows Stede's well-meaning but generally unsuccessful attempts to become a feared pirate captain. Stede's apparently nonsensical actions catch the interest of the notorious Blackbeard, who has been the top of the pirate food chain for years and therefore feels like there's no challenge left in it. And because of this, he's become bored out of his mind with the usual pirate grind and is fascinated by Steve's shenanigans. Blackbeard catches up to Stede just as he's been captured, injured and hanged by the Spanish, and Blackbeard manages to save Bonnet's life. Over the course of the series, Stede and Ed fall in love. They share a mutual love of fine clothes, elaborate plans to mess with the naval forces that are hunting them, and a distaste for killing. Throughout all of this, Israel Hands is lurking in the background, giving Stede the evils like he's Mrs. Danvers glaring at the new Mrs. De Winter. He's been working with Blackbeard for years, managing Ed's increasingly erratic behaviour and keeping the crew functional when Blackbeard couldn't do it himself. So he's not happy with this random posh boy coming in and stealing all of Blackbeard's attention. The relationship between Izzy and Blackbeard it's not a healthy one. It's clear that they love each other in their own way, but they're two very damaged human beings. Ed created the persona of Blackbeard in order to survive the brutalities of pirate life, but it's a character that he has outgrown, and he's desperate to break free of the cage that he's built from himself. Izzy, however, loved Blackbeard the way that he was, and he doesn't know how to let his long-term captain, friend, and love interest, ... evolve into the person that he needs to be. Stede, in counterpoint, loves the man that Ed is when he's not performing Blackbeard. He actively encourages Ed to embrace his love of silks and of good food and the other things that he's tried to pretend that he didn't want while he was pretending that he was Blackbeard. We begin to see something emerging here, and there are three personas to Ed teach. There's Ed, who likes the finer things in life and is falling in love with Stede Bonnet. And then there's Blackbeard, the terror of the sea, who maims and steals his way through life but never kills. And then there's the Kraken, who killed his own father and will kill again if necessary. Three different facets to one man's personality that he cannot seem to reconcile. So Izzy does not like Stede. Apart from being green with envy over Bonnet being able to access parts of Ed that Izzy just cannot seem to reach, he sees Stede as weak. Stede's leadership style is based on active listening and positive affirmations, which is in direct contrast to Izzy, who relies on physical violence and intimidation. The show demonstrates that Stede's method is the superior one, with Stede regularly saving the day with his quote-unquote softer methods. Izzy's toxic masculinity is shown to be counterproductive within the narrative. In Series 1, he does try to bully and intimidate the crew, and initially this is just foiled by Lucius, who is arguably the most femme member of the Revengers team. This eventually escalates to the whole crew mutinying against Izzy when he becomes captain and tries to lead the crew with the same intimidation tactics that he's used before. And Izzy is only just saved from a watery grave by the timely return of Blackbeard. So Series 1 ends with Izzy handing Stede over to the English Navy in the hopes that Blackbeard will return to his former self once he no longer has Stede's softening influence around. Ed surprises Izzy by saving Stede from execution by using the legal loophole of the Act of Grace. This means that they won't be executed, but they will have to give up piracy forever. Blackbeard is willing to give up being a pirate for Stede's sake. Obviously, Izzy is not a fan of this. So because of reasons that are not really important to this video, Ed does end up back on the Revenge, while Stede goes back to his wife and children. Ed believes that Stede has left him, and in response to this he recommits to his Kraken persona. His first act is to remove Izzy's toe and forcibly feed it to him. Izzy is thrilled by this, and he believes that he finally has Blackbeard back and that they can pick up where they left off. So Series 2 picks up shortly after Series 1 finishes. Blackbeard has, in his post-breakup depression, created a toxic atmosphere aboard the Revenge. He is forcing the crew to raid ship after ship despite their treasure stores being full to overflowing, pushing himself and the rest of the crew to breaking point in a bid to dull the pain of being left by Stede. In this time, Izzy's realised that he has, to use a technical term, fucked up. He's trying to manage Blackbeard's more erratic tendencies and keep both captain and crew running, but this is being made increasingly difficult as Ed seeks deeper into his self-destructive tendencies. Izzy tells Blackbeard that he loves him and is instantly rejected. Devastated but determined, Izzy still tries to take the brunt of Ed's anger onto himself to spare the people under his command. And this is where we begin to see a very different side of Israel Hans. So Series 1 Izzy is willing to make the crew utterly miserable to keep Blackbeard happy. Series 2 Izzy, though, he's evolved, realising that Blackbeard will never be happy, and therefore he's pivoted to trying to minimise the damage that Blackbeard does to the rest of the crew, taking the brunt of Ed's misplaced anger to deflect it from the rest of the team. The crew responds to this by taking Izzy in as one of their own, supporting him as Stede once supported them. Frenchie and Jim tell Izzy that Blackbeard is abusing him, pointing out that the captain has taken at least another 2 of Izzy's toes, and the crew privately agrees with them, supporting Izzy. So Blackbeard catches wind of this and becomes mildly unhinged. He demands that the crew tells them that if they think that he's made the ship a toxic place to be. The trouble with this is he does it while pointing a gun at them. And now, to be fair, I don't have any experience in people management, but I do feel reasonably confident in saying that a gun to the face probably doesn't encourage anyone to be open and honest with their discourse, but I could be wrong. So the crew understandably declines to tell Blackbeard the truth about his behaviour, and the only person who dares to point out that Blackbeard has made the ship an awful and poisonous place to be is Izzy, and Blackbeard shoots him in the leg for it. So Blackbeard then insists that Frenchie finishes Izzy off and takes his place as first mate. However, Frenchie and the rest of the crew defy Blackbeard, risking his wrath, and they work together to hide Izzy in one of the ship's secret compartments. They try to nurse him back to health, even though his leg is beyond saving. Blackbeard finds Izzy in the compartment and gives his former first mate a pistol, encouraging Izzy to shoot him in the back of the head in a desperate bid to escape his self-hatred. Izzy calls him a coward and tells Ed to clean up his own mess. Ed leaves him with the gun, and we hear the pistol fire as if Izzy has done what Frenchie refused to do and finished himself off. Blackbeard says goodbye, stating that he loved Izzy as best he could. So Blackbeard then steers the ship directly into a storm before breaking the ship's wheel so that they have no chance of returning to safety. He threatens to fire a cannon into the mast and kill everyone on the Revenge in another attempt to end his own suffering. He's about to do just that when Izzy, who is not dead, makes his way back onto the deck and shoots Blackbeard, the man he's loved for years, in order to save his crew. Blackbeard is delighted to see Izzy up and alive, cackling and calling Izzy an indestructible little fucker. Plot reasons mean that Stede is back at sea now, and he and the rest of the crew are reunited with Blackbeard and the gang, with Captain Bonnet actually orchestrating the rescue. Izzy tries to thank Stede, who, understandably, ignores Izzy's olive branch. After all, last time Stede saw Izzy, Izzy was selling him out to the English. But with Stede come back, Ed slowly learns that he really can let the mantle of Blackbeard drop for good and just be Ed. He apologises to the crew and learns to function with them again, slowly earning their trust back. Stede and Izzy also begin to build an uneasy friendship. Stede asks Izzy to teach him to fight, and he slowly starts to become more confident with his abilities as a pirate. So there's an amazing episode where a rival pirate ship ambushes the Revenge and captures the whole crew except for Lucius and Black Pete, who were below decks celebrating their engagement. Once Lucius and Pete finally realise what's happened, they prepare to rush onto the deck and save their friends in a flurry of violence. But they don't even need to because Stede's already saving the day. So it turns out that the rival crew is extremely unhappy with the way their captain treats them, and Stede's positive words and support encourage them to mutiny and create their own less toxic leadership system. And I have a point with this, I promise, just bear with me. So this crew's mutiny proves yet again that in the universe of Our Flag Means Death, violence does not save the day. Listening skills and positive leadership does. As a side note, I'd like to point out that during this episode, the crew of the Revenge are having a party, and Wee John is going in drag as the sea goddess Calypso. Izzy stumbles on him when he's putting on his makeup, and in the next scene, Izzy is also wearing makeup and belting out La Vie en Rose to a delighted crew, and it is just such a beautiful episode, and I just highly recommend that you watch it. So anyway, that ending. The crew go to the Republic of Pirates to restock their supplies, but the Republic ends up being besieged by the Navy, and the crew are captured and thrown in a cell to await their execution. The team mount a plan to escape, but Izzy ends up getting shot in the stomach before they manage to commandeer a ship. As they sail away to safety, Ed cradles Izzy in his arms and begs him not to go, saying that Hans is his only family. Izzy tells Blackbeard that he's actually surrounded by family and that he himself is ready to pass on. The series finishes with the crew of the Revenge sailing away from Izzy's grave, off to pirate another day, while Ed and Steve stay behind and watch the Revenge sail into the sunset. Alright, so now we know how things ended, let's talk about why it was awful. So the creators of Our Flag Means Death have been clear that they wanted to create a show that was inclusive of the LGBTQ community. Now, I think that most people are probably aware of the bury your gays trope, but for those who aren't, between 1934 and 1968, what could or could not be shown on screen in Hollywood was dictated by the Hays Code. Now, a lot of people have done videos on the Hays Code and explained it much better than I ever could, so I won't try to rehash that. Just suffice to say, the code stated that any sexual perversion, including queer people, don't you just love history? Anyway, queer people could not be rewarded on screen. In other words, they could not have happy endings. This generally meant that, in the stories, the queers had to die. So this is a trope that's actually persisted to this day, even though the Hays Code is long since abandoned. I'm sure that most of you watching can name at least one or two shows that have killed off their queer characters for no apparent reason. In Series 1, Izzy represents toxic masculinity that Ed was trying to get away from, even as Izzy tries to cling tighter and tighter to Blackbeard. So this is a masculinity that is in direct opposition to Stede's character, and it's clear from the storytelling which one the audience is supposed to understand is effective and which is negative. Series 2, however, sees a complete shift from this. Series 1 had an Izzy that was loyal to Blackbeard to the detriment of himself and everyone around him. But Series 2 gives us an Izzy Hans who has learned to be loyal to those who treat him well, namely the crew. They are the ones who try to support him in breaking away from his unhealthy relationship with Blackbeard. They hide him when he's injured. They prop him up when he cannot stand by himself after losing a leg, and they gift him a prosthetic limb to help him walk again. So this is especially evident in the episode I mentioned where Izzy finds Wee John getting into drag as Calypso. Series 1 Israel Hans would have been at least dismissive, if not vocally disgusted by this. But Series 2 Izzy joins in with the party, asking Wee John to do his makeup too and singing to the crew in their evident delight. He allows himself to embrace both his found family and his more feminized side, and he finds joy and support in this. So, not to be disgustingly earnest with you or anything, because I know that the internet hates that, but I just honestly love this episode so much. Series 2 is also the series where Izzy finally allows himself to confess that he loves Ed in the best way that he can. So it's disappointing for a self-proclaimed queer representative show to kill off a character who's only just found it in himself to voice a love for another man, and to demonstrate non-masculine traits, especially for an audience who have already had to see the characters representing themselves die over and over and over again. Bury Your Gaze is ironically being resurrected just when we began to feel like we might be safe. Izzy's death doesn't make sense within the internal logic of the show, because Our Flag Means Death is not a show where main characters die. Lucius gets pushed overboard in the middle of the ocean and pops back up a few episodes later. Stede gets a blade to the gut and is hanged. Ed gets run through and has his skull smashed in by a cannonball, and half the crew get marooned on a desert island, but they're all walking around and quipping witty dialogue by the next episode. In our world, any of the above injuries, or a shot to the stomach, would absolutely be life-threatening. But in the universe of Our Flag Means Death, they are shown to be inconveniences at best. So why did a shot to Izzy's stomach cause death, especially to a canonically indestructible little fucker? I'm just trying to meet the show at its own internal logic here, but it's just not adding up. Even if health issues like gunshot wounds to the stomach were fatal in our flag, it's not real life, it's a story, and therefore things like realism and accuracy and how dirty someone would look after spending months on end at sea should come second to telling a good story, and Izzy dying was simply not a good story. Izzy's death would make sense for the Israel Hands from Series 1 because he represented the toxic, unhealthy ideals that Blackbeard was clinging to despite himself. The death of Series 1's Izzy would have symbolically shown the death of those negative stereotypes and allowed Ed to be free, and that would definitely make sense narratively. But this is Series 2, and it's been shown that Izzy has evolved past those unhealthy behaviours. Plus, that Izzy is already dead. He symbolically died when Izzy failed to end himself after Blackbeard gave him the pistol, and he's been effectively reborn into a very different man. He has friends among the crew now, his life is no longer revolving around Edward Teach, so he doesn't need to die in order for Ed to blossom into the best version of himself, because again, Series 1 Izzy is already gone. So one of the many good things about our flag is that it's a true ensemble piece. The main characters are Stede and Ed, but most of the other characters do have their own motivations. For example, Jim wants to avenge their family's deaths, Frenchie used to be a servant and arguably knows more about spoon etiquette than even Stede does. Wee John used to make dresses with his mum and is keen on lighting people on fire, and Roach really likes to do just a little bit of light torturing, and we love that for him. So Izzy's death only makes sense if you look at it through the lens of Blackbeard's character development. Like we covered earlier, his death could pave the way for Ed to say goodbye to the persona of Blackbeard forever. But our flag does not usually fall into the trap of having things happen just out of convenience for the main characters, because it usually lets the other characters breathe in their own right. But Izzy's death only makes sense if we treat Ed as the main character of the universe, rather than Izzy's internal life being just as important as anyone else's. So as I've shown, Izzy's true love story in Series 2 was with the crew. He defended them from Blackbeard when the captain was in his rabid dog era, and they cared for him in return. Therefore, if Izzy was going to die for any reason, it should have been for the crew. But he didn't jump in front of a bullet to save someone. It wasn't for family or a selfless sacrifice to let his crewmates escape. He was just standing in the wrong place when his enemy got in a lucky shot. There was no legitimate narrative weight to the death, which is the cardinal sin in a story as far as I'm concerned. If one were to argue that Izzy had to die for Ed to learn a lesson, whether or not you agree with that assessment, you would hope that at least the message would hit home. So watcher, I am sorry to tell you that Izzy's last words could not have been more ignored. As Izzy lies dying in Blackbeard's arms, Ed calls Izzy his only family, but Izzy points out that he is surrounded by family. The crew is his family. It's a beautiful moment where the cast of characters realises that their relationship transcends that of co-workers or even friends. They are inextricably linked for life. Anyway, the episode ends with the crew sailing away while Stede and Ed stay in a house that's about 50 feet from Izzy's grave. Izzy died to show that Ed wasn't alone, and then Ed opts to leave the family that he apparently wanted so badly and stay away from them forever. You might ask yourself how that makes sense. Well, I'm here to tell you, I'm asking myself the same thing. Let me know if you can find the answer, because I sure as hell cannot. In conclusion, Israel Hands was in the middle of growing out of his toxic masculinity cage and into becoming the most interesting character in the show, and it is absolutely criminal that he was removed in this way, especially because the show has now been cancelled, which means that Izzy's death may well be the note that it ends on. We'll just have to keep our fingers crossed that the series will be picked up by another network, but I wouldn't hold my breath. I know that some of you are going to say that I'm just upset because Izzy Hands was my favourite character and that's why I'm unnecessarily salty about the ending. And to that I say, well yeah, you're absolutely right. But that doesn't mean that I'm wrong. So of course, this is all just my opinion and you're absolutely entitled to disagree with me. Art is subjective and you might have got something completely different from the Series 2 finale. If you did, please let me know because I'd love to hear your thoughts. But David Jenkins, I just want to talk.